You know what sucks? Spanish verbs. Spanish verbs just suck a huge. I'll let you finish that sentence yourself. They suck something, anyway. Every time I want to teach any verb here on the channel, I have to give this kind of long list of excuses about why I'm not going to teach you the whole verb. Today I'm going to expand on that point because Spanish verbs are really a lot to handle. But don't worry, there is hope. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. We'll get to that. For now, let's talk about why Spanish verbs are terrible. We're going to call this video The Truth About Spanish Verbs. Hey everybody, it's Daniel. Welcome back to my sofa in beautiful Barcelona. This is my 20th year in Spain. Later this year, I am going to reach the 20th anniversary of my life in Spain. Long-term Spanish expats tend to call it their Spainiversary. It's a thing. So I have been around the block with the Spanish language. I know kind of a lot about it that I've picked up in all this time. One of the big things that you have to deal with if you're going to deal with Spanish is the verbs. So I've got kind of a list of points here about why Spanish verbs are hard, and we're just going to go into it. And then we're going to get to the light at the end of the tunnel, which will make you feel better about the whole thing. Okay, so point one, Spanish verbs are difficult because they have about 124 forms. I just did the official count over on RAI.es, the website of the Real Academia Española. It's the institution that kind of makes the rules for the Spanish language and publishes the official dictionary and the official meanings. We don't have anything similar in English. In Spanish, they've got this organization, basically it's a bunch of old people who are famous sort of writers and academics who sit down and, debate whether they're going to accept new words, things like that. Anyway, the official list of conjugations there, I counted 124 forms for a regular verb like comer. An irregular verb is going to have the same number of forms, and they get to be a little bit repetitive, so maybe don't take the number 124 too literally. However, I saw another website called Ella Verbs, I think it's ellaverbs.com, where they have even more, depending on what you're counting. If you want to count they call it like the informal indicative future or something like that, all the boy-a stuff, that could be an extra form. I've never counted that because that's just a conjugation of the verb ir. It's like I'm going to do something, which is, I'm going to do it in the future. It's not a form of the verb because you just use the infinitive afterwards. But, you could count it and that would give you a larger number. So, thing one about Spanish verbs, there are a lot of forms. Thing two about Spanish verbs, maybe we could call these uncomfortable truths about Spanish verbs. There's a lot of irregular verbs. Some verbs are irregular. Some verbs are more irregular than others, let's say. Yesterday, I did a video about saber, which is to know something. And in present, there's only one irregularity in saber. It's yo sé, tú sabes, él sabe, etc. So it's exactly like a regular verb, like comer. Comer is just a normal regular verb. We have AR, ER, and IR verbs. So comer is a regular ER verb, and saber in present is the same as comer, except for the first conjugation, yo sé, which is irregular. But then in past, saber has some more irregularities, and it's a little bit more irregular than it appears at first glance once you get into it. Comer is regular across the board. A verb like tener is fully irregular. Well, I guess not fully, because some of the tenses are pretty consistent across all verbs. But for, present and past, Tener doesn't have any regular forms as far as I know. So some verbs are irregular. Some irregular verbs are more irregular than others. Important to keep in mind. Uncomfortable truth number 3 about Spanish verbs. There are regional forms. When I was in high school, they told us don't even worry about the vosotros form. They only use it in Spain. I guess they weren't expecting most of us to move to Spain at any point, so, it was never a thing. When I moved to Spain, I suddenly had to learn the vosotros form. I still don't know exactly how to spell it. 20 years later, I haven't figured that out because I don't have to spell it very much. There's an accent. I'm not sure if the accent is over the penultimate letter or the antepenultimate letter. Sorry, the next to last or the third to last letter in the vosotros form. Anyway, vosotros is a regional form that is used in Spain to talk to a group of people informally. There's also a vos form. Vos is like tú. They use it in in Argentina, well, Central and South America. I don't think it's all over Central and South America, but Argentinians use it. There's a lot of Argentinians here in Barcelona, so if you're speaking to somebody and they use some verb form that you haven't heard before, it could be the vos form. Vos is like tú. It is informal, you form. So I've never even learned the rules for that. I think I could probably figure them out if I had some, time and a piece of paper. But generally, don't worry about it. There's a lot of regionalisms in Spanish, so, friends that I have from other places say things which are officially incorrect, but in their hometown, it's perfectly correct to say it. I don't know. You just got to live with these things. So the regional forms may complicate things a bit. Let's talk about uncomfortable truth number 4 about Spanish verbs. Tú and usted. This is a concept that does not have a lot of equivalence in English, but it's the formal and informal treatments. We really don't do this in English. Maybe if you wanted to call somebody, Mr. Johnson instead of Bob in English, that would be the equivalent. If you're his friend, you call him Bob. If he is your boss, you call him Mr. Johnson. For example, that's about the closest we have. The thing about this is it's also very regional. I had a Colombian friend back in the day who just called everybody usted. And so I would call her usted, and it was fine. In Colombia, I guess they just do that. At least, I don't even know. Maybe just her social class or her neighborhood in Bogota or whatever. No idea. She's the only person I spent significant time with who was serious about calling literally everybody usted. Anyway, here in Spain, I almost never use usted. It's just not very common here in Spain. It used to be more common, back in the day when things were more formal and we had a more rigid social hierarchy, I guess. At this point, I might use usted if I'm like in the elevator with one of the elderly people in my building here. I might say, ¿A qué planta va usted? What floor are you going to? Usually we don't even have to have this conversation. Everybody just pushes the button on their own and it's fine. But, I would be tempted if somebody is 80 years old and I don't know them at all to use usted. Otherwise, not really a big thing. I don't know, maybe if a police officer stopped me on the street for some reason, I would be tempted to be very respectful. But it's not something that usually happens, so I haven't tested this hypothesis. So my recommendation for tú y usted, I don't think I'm even pronouncing the Spanish T correctly. Sorry about that. Tú y usted, I don't know. Sue me. The thing I would say about that is that you shouldn't worry about it too much. Just do whatever people around you are doing and it'll probably be fine. The other thing, don't confuse tú with an accent with tú without an accent. Tú without an accent is the possessive adjective. It's your tú with an accent is you. The accents are important a lot of the time, for differentiating certain things. Like I said in the video yesterday, if you're writing text messages or something, it might not be a big deal. But I always try to just be more correct than usual because I'm a grammar snob, and also because as a foreign person, I don't want to give people extra excuses to think that I am, confused and out of place, let's say. So I try to be super correct in my spelling all the time. Uncomfortable truth number 5 about the Spanish language is some verbs change meaning in the past. When I'm talking about saber and conocer, which both mean to know, I did kind of a mind map of everything I could say about saber today, and it got really long, which is why I'm doing this video instead of, 15 more videos about saber. In past, there's the conjugation, which is yo supe, tú supiste, él supo, which means something different. It's sort of like to find out. It's to discover a piece of information. The same with conocer. If I say yo conozco a Pedro, it's I know Pedro. But if I want to say it in past, yo conocí a Pedro is I met Pedro, talking about the first time I met him. It's kind of common among very important verbs that there is a different meaning in the past than in the present. I'll give a lesson about that someday. It's not too hard. I learned it in high school, and here we are. Not a big issue, but it is something you need to take into account. Uncomfortable truth number 6 about Spanish verbs. Is this 6? I think it is. The subjunctive. What is the subjunctive? Well, it kind of involves a mood or my opinion or something that is uncertain. It's definitely used by real people in real life, and they wouldn't be able to explain why they're using it. You've got to learn some rules. I can get into it at some point, but it's not super important to learn the subjunctive if you don't know the present and the past. I would just deal with present and past first and then worry about the subjunctive later on. So the subjunctive is, there's lots of different subjunctive tenses also. Have I mentioned that there's 20 different tenses, just like in English? And that's how we get to this, 124 forms or whatever, is there's a lot of tenses. So there's several subjunctive tenses. It's okay. You'll be fine. It gets sort of repetitive. Towards the bottom end of the verb conjugation charts, there's a lot of repetition, and you'll get over it. Subjunctive is a word you may not even really be familiar with outside of this context of Spanish verbs. And there's other ones that, just kind of make it a little bit more complicated. I think if you're a serious grammar nerd, you might know about this already, but I only learned about any of this with my contact with Spanish, but they use these words that are not common in English, like preterite. As far as I can tell, preterite just means past, but they don't call the, past tense in Spanish the past tense. They call it the preterite. There's a pluscuamperfecto. Pluscuamperfecto is like the past before the other past, I think. We call it past perfect in English. The past perfect, talking about a past moment before another past moment. That's the typical example. When I arrived at the party, she had already left. She had already left before I arrived. So that's, fairly simple in English. It's a bit more complicated in Spanish, but that is the pluscuamperfecto. There's also the word indicative. What is the indicative? Well, it's not the subjunctive. When I say that the subjunctive is sort of a mood or an uncertain thing, indicative is the opposite of that. Indicative is something that really happened. If I say I drank a coffee and I ate a donut, that is indicative. That indicates that something really happened. If I were hypothesizing about a donut that does not make me fat, I would say, quiero un donut que no engorde. Una rosquilla que no engorde. Officially, donut is a complicated situation to discuss over here in Spain. It involves international trademarks and stuff, whatever. But if I were saying un donus que no engorde, that would be a hypothetical donut that does not make one fat with the subjunctive conjugation. So subjunctive because I don't know if it really exists. It's just something I have in mind, which is hypothetical. So those are the several uncomfortable truths about the Spanish language. There's a lot of forms of the verbs. There's a lot of irregular verbs. Some are more irregular than others. There's some regional conjugations like vos and vosotros. The tú and usted thing is a bit different because we don't use it in English. And I don't have a sixth finger here because I'm holding my phone with the other hand. So this is 6. The subjunctive, the indicative, the preterite, the pluscuamperfecto, all of these words for verb tenses might be completely unfamiliar. So not only are you dealing with an unfamiliar concept, but you're dealing with it in unfamiliar language that means nothing to a person who is not initiated. So there's kind of a steep learning curve with Spanish verbs. So now let's talk about the light at the end of the tunnel. I promised you there was an optimistic conclusion to all this. The optimistic conclusion is that all this makes you a better person and a better English speaker. When you learn another language at a deep level, it will improve your English because you'll be thinking about grammar and the meanings of words in ways you've never done before. So that is good. Also, just learning all of these conjugations is bound to be an interesting experience which will expand your brain power and things like that. Back in the day when I was a young person, we had a book called 501 Spanish Verbs. You could probably get it on Amazon if you wanted to. Now everything's like a mobile app. But 501 Spanish Verbs. I used to go to the park. I might bring a date, some girl I liked, and we would quiz each other on verbs. Some German exchange student in a nice dress quizzing you on verb conjugations can be quite an experience. So, your mileage may vary. If you're just doing this on Duolingo or something, that could also be a bonding experience with somebody you know. Bring a friend. Making Spanish learning a social experience is bound to be a positive one for everybody. Also, like I said, there are a lot of patterns and there gets to be a lot of repetition towards the bottom end of the list of conjugations. So you will get this all eventually. There are even patterns among the irregular verbs. I don't want to get into it because, once you get into one irregular verb, you're going to have to talk about 25 more. But there are patterns in those. Tengo is irregular, but it's irregular in the same way as a lot of other verbs are irregular. So once you learn the verb tener and all of its conjugations, you've already made a step towards learning further irregular verbs. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it. Like I said, you will get this eventually. Thank you for watching. You can donate. expatmadrid.com/donate is the donation page. I make this all for free because I don't have anything to sell. I might eventually develop a course or something, but in the meantime, please donate. expatmadrid.com/donate. Like I said, any amount is fine. I appreciate whatever you have handy. I've gotten some very generous donations recently, which I'm happy about. Thank you to everybody, especially recently. We've got donations from Nancy and Glenn out in the US, also Bob in the US, people who have donated multiple times, actually. I appreciate it. If you just go to expatmadrid.com, you will also find a lot of articles about life in Spain. If you're on YouTube, my podcast, Spain to Go, is on the same YouTube channel, and I don't know where you would be if not on YouTube watching this. Anyway, the Spain to Go podcast is on a lot of other places. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms. Spain to Go is the name. I've got about 85 episodes, mostly about Spain. Sometimes I travel abroad and talk about that. There's a lot of fun stuff. You can check that out. I've got 50 or 60 other videos about the Spanish language here. Most of it involves, verbs and verbal expressions, and some conjugations even. I haven't gone very far into, past and subjunctive and things like that yet, but I will at some point. We'll get more, Spanish verbs up here. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. I appreciate you being here. We'll talk soon. Bye.